Imagine it's 216 BC, and you are a Roman citizen minding your own business. Then suddenly you hear that the Carthaginians have sent their army over the Alps to invade Italy. You would probably think those poor bastards must be nuts. And you wouldn't be wrong. Or maybe you would think that it is an incredible opportunity to plunder some treasures straight from the enemy. Either way, you would probably not believe this crazy tale until you heard it from your own eyes. But what if you were told the story just got crazier? That the Carthaginian invaders were led by none other than Hannibal Barca, Rome's sworn enemy since they kicked his ass back in the First Punic War. Oh, and did we mention the Carthaginian army was full of war elephants? As in the biggest, baddest, meanest war elephants known to the ancient Mediterranean. If you were a Roman, you would literally shit your toga, because it can only mean one thing: the Romans are about to get wrecked. Again. But how could this be possible? Didn't Rome control the seas? Why didn't they block Hannibal's fleet and stop the invasion? Ah, but that's the best part. He didn't come by boat. He came through the Alps. Yep, Hannibal Barca, sworn enemy of Rome, took his army across one of the most treacherous mountain ranges in Europe to strike the heart of the Italian peninsula. It was the boldest, craziest plan ever devised by any general in history. Now, before we start the video, all jokes aside, we would like to point out that Hannibal Barca is widely considered to be the greatest military commander in history. So we will leave the question of genius versus madness for you to decide as we go along. So let's do it. Let's start at the beginning. Let's say it again for the people in the back. Hannibal Barca, sworn enemy of Rome, took his army across one of the most treacherous mountain ranges in Europe to strike the heart of the Italian peninsula. Okay, so now that we've established that there is no reason to question Hanukkah's sanity, let us talk about why he thought that invading Italy directly was the best option when Rome was arguably the strongest naval power in the Mediterranean. Well, for starters, Rome had a massive lead in terms of navy size, with over 200 quinqueremes, which were basically big rowing boats with a bunch of soldiers on them, ready to sail at a moment's notice. On the other hand, Carthage had less than 100 ships, and they were mostly used for transporting goods, not waging war. Plus, the Carthaginians knew that they couldn't beat the Romans at sea, especially after losing their navy in the First Punic War. And they also knew that invading Italy by sea would be almost impossible due to the strong Roman presence in the western Mediterranean. So Hannibal and his advisors came up with another option, one that was not only unexpected, but also brilliant, daring, audacious. Crazy. Let's call it that again. Hannibal decided to cross the Alps with his army and invade Italy directly. Yes, you heard right. Hannibal planned to march his entire army over one of the most treacherous mountain ranges in Europe, dodging dangerous terrains, harsh weather conditions, ambushes, and starving troops, all while carrying with him a secret weapon that would shock the world: the war elephant. Carthage had about 30 pairs of elephants, each weighing about 6 tons and standing 10 feet tall. They were trained to fight and were considered the ultimate weapon of war. But taking them across the Alps was a huge challenge. The terrain was difficult, and the elephants needed to be fed and watered constantly. Plus, Hannibal had to worry about the safety of his army, which consisted of infantry, cavalry, and auxiliary troops, as well as supplies and equipment. Despite all these challenges, Hannibal was determined to succeed. He studied maps and consulted with experts to find the best route through the Alps. He prepared his army for months, training them to survive in the mountains and teaching them how to handle the elephants. He also recruited local guides who knew the terrain and could help them avoid dangers. Then in 218 BC, Hannibal's army set off from Spain, where Carthage had recently conquered some territories and was at its most powerful. They marched through Gaul, avoiding Roman garrisons and gathering allies along the way. Finally, they reached the foothills of the Alps. What happened next is pure legend. Hannibal and his army crossed the Alps in a daring feat of endurance, courage, and skill. They faced treacherous terrains, harsh weather conditions, ambushes, and starving troops. But they never gave up. They kept moving forward, driven by Hannibal's charisma and determination. And then, one day in early 218 BC, they saw it, the summit of the Alps. It was a moment of triumph and relief, but also a moment of danger. For they had reached the most difficult part of their journey, but they had made it. Hannibal and his army had crossed the Alps. When news of his invasion reached Rome, the Romans were shocked and outraged. They couldn't believe that Hannibal had dared to defy them. They assembled a large force under the command of two consuls, Publius Sulpicius and Lucius Aelius Tubero, to stop him. The first battle between Hannibal's forces and the Romans took place at the Trebia River in northern Italy. It was a decisive victory for Hannibal. He used his war elephants to great effect, trampling the Roman infantry and cavalry, and his light troops harassed the Romans, preventing them from regrouping. The Romans lost about 30,000 men, including both consuls, while Hannibal's forces were relatively intact. Hannibal followed up his victory at Trebia with another one at Lake Trasimene in central Italy. Again, he used his war elephants and light troops to great effect, catching the Romans off guard and annihilating them. The Romans lost another 30,000 men, this time under the command of another consul, Gaius Flaminius. Hannibal's reputation as a brilliant and daring general was established. Rome was in panic. The city was shaken by fear and anger. The allies of Rome questioned their loyalty and independence. Some even switched sides and joined Hannibal. Hannibal had become a symbol of defiance and hope for the oppressed and subjugated peoples of the Mediterranean. But Hannibal was not done yet. He had one more battle in mind, a battle that would be his masterpiece, a battle that would shock the world. It was the Battle of Cannae in southern Italy. It took place in August of 216 BC, and it was one of the most epic and brutal battles in ancient history. Hannibal's army was outnumbered 2-1 by the Romans. He was facing two of Rome's best generals, Marcus Aemilius Lepidus and Lucius Aemilius Paulus. The Romans were confident that they could crush Hannibal's forces once and for all. But they didn't know what Hannibal had planned. He had spent 3 years studying the Romans, learning their tactics and strategies, watching their movements, and analyzing their strengths and weaknesses. He knew how to beat them. Hannibal used his knowledge of the Romans to lure them into a trap. He positioned his army in a narrow valley near the town of Cannae, knowing that the Romans would try to flank him. He placed his heavy troops in the center and his light troops around the flanks, leaving gaps for his cavalry to exploit. Then when the Romans attacked, he let them come closer. He let them penetrate his center and break through his flanks, thinking that his cavalry would be too late to save him. But he was wrong. His cavalry was fast and furious. They exploited the gaps in the flanks and charged the Romans from the sides, cutting off the retreat and encircling them completely. It was a massacre. The Romans were annihilated. Their infantry and cavalry were slaughtered. Their standards were captured. Their baggage was looted. Only 2 Roman generals escaped, Lucius Aelius Paulus and Marcus Aelius Labeo. They fled to the nearest Roman city and raised the alarm. News of the Roman defeat at Cannae spread like wildfire. People were stunned and horrified. The Romans had never suffered such a humiliating defeat before. They had never lost so many men in one battle before. They had never been so close to total destruction before. Rome was in chaos. There were riots and protests. There were accusations and conspiracies. There were demands for revenge and punishment. Some wanted Hannibal crucified. Others wanted his head cut off and hung from the Porta, Capanna gate of Rome. But despite the hatred and fear, Rome was not finished yet. They had to keep going. They had to find a way to stop Hannibal and win the war. They had to adapt and overcome. Rome realized that they couldn't defeat Hannibal in open battles. He was too good. He was too creative. He was too daring. So they tried to wear him down. They avoided him. They harassed him. They drained him. Rome also realized that they couldn't invade Carthage directly. Hannibal would be waiting for them. He would be defending his home turf. So they tried to attack him abroad. They invaded Carthage's allies and possessions. They fought Hannibal's brother Hannibal Barca in Spain and defeated him. They cut off supplies and reinforcements from reaching Hannibal. Hannibal stayed in Italy for 4 more years, but he never captured Rome. He never got revenge for his father. He never fulfilled his dream of becoming the greatest general in history. He was stuck in a stalemate. He was isolated and exhausted. In 203 BC, Carthage recalled Hannibal to defend the homeland. Rome had invaded Carthage's territory and was threatening to destroy it. Hannibal had to go back. He left Italy with a heavy heart and a bitter taste in his mouth. He arrived in Carthage just in time to face his last and greatest challenge, Scipio Africanus, the destroyer of Carthage. In 202 BC, Hannibal and Scipio met at the Battle of Zama in North Africa. It was a decisive battle, a battle that would determine the fate of 2 empires, Rome and Carthage. It was a tough fight. Hannibal and Scipio were evenly matched. They were both brilliant strategists and tacticians. They both had excellent armies and resources. But in the end, Scipio won. He defeated Hannibal and crushed Carthage. Hannibal's plan was brilliant, but it was also risky. He took a huge chance by invading Italy directly. He gambled everything on his war elephants and his light troops. He never had enough supplies or reinforcements. He never had the full support of his government or his people. He was alone in Italy. He was a lone wolf. So was Hannibal Barca, the greatest military commander in history, brilliant or mad. We leave that question for you to decide. But one thing is for sure, Hannibal's invasion of Rome was one of the most epic stories ever told.